if you have not been aware of what's happening in Sudan, we have to get into that conversation. So I read a little bit about this. We're going to go back 5 years ago. So the U.S. government 5 years ago actually lifted sanctions on Sudan. I want to show you a clip of just that. And there's a reason why I'm going back to this particular time, because we're about to head in that direction again. Listen to this. This was 5 years ago.
Joy on the streets of Sudan after the U.S. State Department announced it was lifting 20-year-old economic and trade sanctions. It's seen as a move down the path of normalizing relations. Some think it'll improve their life.
As you see, the American and Sudanese flags are flown in a spontaneous, popular, joyful reaction. This is an indication that the sanctions have had a heavy toll on the people and the economy.
Prices and living costs have fallen and made it easier for the needy.
The announcement was widely anticipated, a process started under President Barack Obama. The U.S. saying the move came after Sudan began addressing concerns of fighting terrorism and human rights abuses.
That's the piece I wanted you to hear. It started under Obama. Let's go on.
The sanctions were piling pressure on an already struggling economy.
It's true that the country is facing economic problems. However, the sanctions exacerbated, if not complicated, the situation. It doesn't enable government officials to restructure the economy as it should be.
There were also assurances that Sudan won't enter into arms deals with North Korea, and it had already diplomatically distanced itself from Iran. But the opposition feels it's the wrong way to go.
The lifting of sanctions will not bear any fruit. It's only empty propaganda, but in the end, it will have a negative impact on the regime, simply because it sent out the wrong message to the people.
Sudan, though, will remain on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. So as the relationship between the two countries improves, there's still more work to be done. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera.
Okay, so let's hold on to that. Let's remember that. I wanted to show you that for a reason, because it has not changed. It has not changed. Now, I want you to listen to this statement from John Kirby. John Kirby is about to lie to the American people, and then we're going to do the correction here. But I want you to hear what John Kirby says about the U.S. possibly implementing sanctions again on Sudan. Listen to this.
Hi, John. I'm here. Can you walk us through the thought process of why you decided to impose sanctions on Sudan now? We asked you this question many times before, but is it a way to try and to you give up on the generals to end this conflict and return to the civil rule? Is it a way to encourage them actually to end the conflict? And second, why you did not mention General Burhan or General Hamiti by name? You just did not name anybody in this section.
Well, we didn't announce any sanctions today. As I just said before I turned it over to questions, we don't preview sanctions. I have no sanctions to speak to one way or another. What this EO will do is give us, the administration, thanks to the president's decision to execute this order, to sign this order, will give us authorities and flexibility should we want to apply sanctions as one tool here in order to hold folks accountable and to try to get at a better solution inside Sudan. Now, look, there was no need in reading out the EO to name the leaders of these military factions, but it's not like we're afraid to. We've said all along, we're talking about General Burhan, who is the leader of the SAF, and General Hameti, who's the leader of the Rapid Support Forces. But you shouldn't read into that I'm previewing some specific sanctions against them individually or any other entity. We don't preview sanctions. If and when we've got something with respect to sanctions to speak to, we'll certainly let you guys know.
You decided on the sanctions.
Again, we haven't decided on sanctions.
Hold that soundbite. We have not decided on sanctions. That's why she asked him twice. I'm going to show you in just a second.
We don't preview sanctions. This EO allows for authorities to look at tools, leverage tools, particularly in the case of sanctions, possibly sanctions. But we haven't issued any sanctions.
Is that true? You see, I asked that question because a number of news outlets actually are saying the exact opposite. I'm going to show you one of them, but there are several outlets discussing this. Let me go ahead and share this really quick. Remember what he said. We have not decided to implement sanctions. Hold on to that. Now, it's interesting because according to USA Today and a couple of others as well, President Joe Biden is taking steps to punish those involved with the recent violence in Sudan that has killed hundreds of people and thrown the African nation into chaos. Here's the tricky part. Biden signed an executive order on Thursday that allows the U.S. government to sanction those involved in the violence. USA Today, Reuters has reported this. I believe Politico has also reported this. A number of news outlets have reported this. And John Kirby just told you that they have not decided on that. That's not the message that went out to the press. It goes on to say that Biden said in a statement, his order will hold individuals responsible for threatening the peace, security, and stability of Sudan, undermining Sudan's democratic transition, using violence against civilians, or committing serious human rights abuses. The violence in Sudan is a tragedy, and it is a betrayal of the Sudanese people's clear demand for civilian government and a transition to democracy. I want to go back and I want to explain to you why this is happening. What all is happening in Sudan right now, why the U.S. government is trying to implement sanctions on them. Remember, you can never just go by their word. You need to listen to other people as well. Al Jazeera is really good at this. And I want to share this clip here that explains it. We're going to break this down because I think this is important. What's happening in Sudan? So again, this is from Al Jazeera. I usually go to them for a lot, actually. And Black Agenda Report also has an article about this as well. I think JB, if you guys follow JB on his channel, he covered that article. So since JB covered the article, I'm going to use the video. So what is happening in Sudan? Let's get started.
Let's talk about what's happening in Sudan.
Rival forces remain locked in a power struggle despite international calls for a ceasefire.
It's an all-out battle for control of the country between Sudan's army and a paramilitary unit known as the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, led by men who used to be allies.
These two gentlemen here, sorry, just put it back on that picture. Oh, it's hard to find it just back. Let me try it again. I'll play it. And These two gentlemen here, this is where the conflict lies. So two leaders, and they used to actually be allies. They are not allies anymore. So I wanted you to see their pictures so you understand where the conflict comes from. Listen to this.
Who used to be allies. Hundreds of people have been killed, and hundreds have been injured. There's fighting in different parts of Sudan, but it's heaviest in the capital, Khartoum. There have been attempts at a ceasefire, but they haven't lasted. There have been air attacks and shelling. The airport has been severely damaged. There's no running water or electricity. Supplies of food are running low.
So I wanted you to hear that part. There's no running water or electricity. And then think about what I just told you, that the US government, the Biden administration, is already looking at implementing sanctions on Sudan. So if they don't have any running water or food, and they're going to get hit with sanctions, that means those people are going to be basically left to die. I never agree with economic sanctions because it doesn't just hurt the people that you're trying to hurt. Notice in that USA article, they said that this is going to be done to target those who are basically a part of the unrest. But that's not how sanctions work. It affects people, the civilians who have nothing to do with the conflict at all. Those people also suffer. Those people also starve. This is what's happening to kids in Afghanistan. They're starving because of the sanctions implemented by the United States government. They weren't fighting in this war. So it's this idea that you have these targeted sanctions. That's ridiculous. Everyone's going to be affected. So keep that in mind. No water, no running water, barely any food. And now they're about to be hit with sanctions. Terrible.
Ridiculous battle that has civilians caught in the middle. And we have nothing to do with this.
So what's behind the fighting? Well, people in Sudan have been struggling to set up a democracy after decades under one-man rule. Omar al-Bashir came to power in a military coup in the late 1980s, became president, and stayed for 30 years, until people rose up and demanded that he step down. Then the army took over, and people didn't want them in charge either.
So this is around 2019. Pay attention to the timeline on the left-hand side of the screen here so you can see as we're going through the years. But I will say it's really interesting that the people rose up and demanded that the leader be removed, Like we don't have that happen in the United States. This happens in other countries, right? This happened in Sri Lanka a couple of months ago as well. They rose up and demanded that the prime minister get out, and he got all the way out and took a plane and everything. But this is around 2019.
So after pressure from protesters, the army agreed to share power with different political groups in a transitional government. The idea was that it would oversee a transition to a democratic system. But 2 years later, the army kicked out the prime minister and seized power again.
Now, this is 2021, so this is the military coup.
The people in Sudan seem to be trapped in this limbo, and they're going round and round in a circle that involves the same people, with no clear path or trajectory on how they can actually start to plan for transitioning.
There have been ongoing talks to make that transition happen between the military and political groups representing that pro-democracy movement. But a major reason the process is being held up is because of an underlying rivalry between the army and the rapid support forces that have become like a second army.
So here you go. You have the conflict between the army and the rapid support forces.
And many people see this as a personal rivalry between the army's leader, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who's effectively the leader of the country, and the leader of the RSF, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo,
these two men here,
widely known as Hemeti. The thing is, for years, both men were on the same side and had been since the war in Darfur. Hemeti led a militia at the time widely known as the Janjaweed, and they were used by al-Bashir's army to fight rebels in the region of Darfur.
They were created to protect the upper echelon of the military and the senior commanders.
They're accused of carrying out war crimes there, and al-Bashir actually got charged with committing genocide. In 2013, the militia were rebranded as the Rapid Support Forces and worked with the army on different missions. Then, in 2019, Hemeti and General al-Burhan joined up to get rid of al-Bashir. And during the big pro-democracy protests, the RSF and the army were accused of killing more than 100 people. But since then, the RSF has been acting a lot more independently, and they've grown more powerful.
They were able to establish vast investments around the country and outside the country, especially in the gold trade.
These two main actors, the army and the rapid support forces, were able to collude, now successfully for about 4 years to stay in power themselves. But there was always that core tension about who was the top dog between them.
So that brings us to the fighting right now. As part of Sudan's transition to democracy, there have been talks about integrating the RSF into the army, but they can't agree over the timeline. The army proposed 2 years, while the RSF wanted it to be 10.
If the RSF has already been able to capture so much power on its own, it may be very difficult to bring it into the army. Oftentimes when groups, establish their own, get their own feet wet, establish their own like footing, and they've been doing this for quite some time, when you add them to another organization, it can be tricky because they have their own way of doing things. And now they have to go up under a leadership that is going to be somewhat different. And now they're going to have to go along with what they want. And they've been doing things their own way. So that's a tricky situation. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
The army, had been making a stand. They realized that the rapid support forces have been growing. The head, General Hemeti, has political ambitions himself. And I think there was a sense that if they did not somehow force the rapid support forces to agree to integrate and to go under them, that this force would keep growing and grow out of the control of the formal military.
It's unclear who started the fighting, but on April 15th, both sides started trading accusations that they had attacked each other's bases in Khartoum. Then they fought to take control of the presidential palace, the airport, and the state TV channel. The army has air power, and they've been hitting RSF bases in the capital, many of them in residential areas.
So this piece about the residential areas, I'm going to show you another clip about that as well. Some people have been evacuated, but we'll get into that. But this is another part of the issue. People who were not even a part of the conflict, their lives are in jeopardy now.
The RSF don't have planes, but they do have anti-aircraft weapons, and they have about 100,000 men. There have been plenty of calls for the fighting to stop, from Sudan's neighbors, the African Union, the UN, the EU, the US, and the UK. And there could be some leverage from countries like Egypt, which has been a close ally to the Sudanese army, and on the other side, the UAE, which has ties to the RSF. But there's no sign that either side wants to back down.
Right now, for a lot of people, it's a period of confusion. It's a period of uncertainty about what's going to happen in the next few minutes, the next few hours, the next few days. And it's a period of war, and they have nowhere to turn to.
A lot of people in Sudan are scared, heartbroken, and frustrated. Their country keeps getting derailed off that path towards democracy. It's a hope that seems even more distant now.
So that gives you a little bit of the background there. I might try to bring someone on also to talk about this in more detail, but I do want to show you another video because people have been having to evacuate. So this brings up other problems, right? Because once people start evacuating, then you're going into other countries and other places where those people in those countries may not want you there. And I've seen this happen before. When I lived in Germany, there were a group of refugees from Turkey, and it seemed like for the most part, people in Germany were okay with it in the beginning, but it was like the more that came along, then it was almost like people were like, okay, wait a minute, what's happening here? Like we can't take care of everybody, that kind of concept, right? So that's the thing. Now you're putting them in another type of situation because they have to leave their home and they have to go live somewhere else. They just have to run away. But like I said, you're putting them in a tricky situation. And I don't think it's good for the people. And I want to show you an example of a video here of people that have been evacuated. Let me go ahead and share this here. Now, this was from Sky News. It says, I didn't know that you came here. Sky's Yoshra found her uncle in crowds as evacuees were arriving in Jeddah from Sudan. So let me go ahead and play this really quick here. That's the thing. When people are evacuated, that doesn't mean they're necessarily kept together.
If we do one more interview.
Oh my God, that's my uncle. That's my uncle.
Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. See, she said, I didn't know that you came here. They didn't even know. I mean, when people are evacuated again, there's no guarantee that the whole family is going to stay together or be together. You're evacuated based on where you are at that point in time. So if everybody in the family is not at the same house or the same area, you don't know if you're going to see them. You don't even know if you're going to be evacuated to the same place.
الحمد لله. احساسك شنو؟ لا الحمد لله بس عاوزين لك الحمد لله. الحمد لله. يعطيكم العافية.
He said, God bless you all.
يعني خليني أعمل معاك حوار سريع. ما قادر أتكلم. ما قادر تعبان جدا. أوكي. خلاص أنا بوريهم إن أنت وصلت. هاي بالله. طيب. بكلم أمي. أوكي. بعد ذاك إحنا حنوديهم بورت السودان إن شاء الله كلهم. Very good. Very good. شكرا يا خالد.
Yeah, and there's other like this. Like if you go on Twitter now, and here's another one I wanted to play as well. Sorry about that. So these are the younger people in Sudan, and they're saying that we're here to change the country for the future. We want a revolution. We're tired of the chaos. So this is the younger people that are speaking out. It's very sad. Because again, they have nothing to do with the conflict, but it's just really not safe for them there right now. Like here's another one I wanted to show. It says Serenity of Khartoum, hope I'm saying that correctly, totally empty streets. A homeless man sings alone amidst sounds of shelling and gunfighting. A stray dog comes along and sits beside him. He tries to comfort the dog by patting on him. So this is just showing you like what's happening. Everybody's gone. And notice he can still hear the warfare in the background. I mean, imagine if like you were forced to leave your home like right now and you're not with your family, but you're being evacuated. You don't even know if you're going to see your family again. You may not end up in the same place. Imagine that. This guy was left behind somehow. I don't know if he just chose not to go, but that's crazy. Like, what do you do with that? What do you do? This is what I think Americans don't seem to understand, that, you know, there are people living in countries like this where when they go to sleep at night, they hear warfare. When they get up in the morning, they hear warfare. If they're even trying to go to school, they hear or see warfare. Could you imagine? We haven't really had to deal with that for the most part. Yeah, there was, September 11, but that was one time thing. Like, it's not in my generation. We haven't had to deal with this. This is like every day for them right now. Man. Yeah, so you know what they said? No running water, running out of food. And then it says here, the roads are not safe. We can't guarantee the safety of our family. The residents in Khartoum, Sudan, describes life in a conflict zone as fighting shows no signs of abating. Listen to this. It's another one.
I have 3. The roads are not safe. we can't guarantee the safety of our family on the roads right now. I have 3 teenage sons. I have been through RSF checkpoints. They are manned by very young, very young soldiers. And I don't want to put my children in a confrontation with them.
Mm-hmm. So if the roads aren't safe, even if there are places where you can go to get food, you're less likely to go out to get it.
We will stay home as long as we can, as long as it's feasible, as long as it's viable. Right now, I'm also accompanied by my elderly mother. And so the evacuation routes that people have taken heading to Port Sudan or Dongola or Halfa in the north.
Pausing here. So she's talking about the evacuation routes, and she's also there with her mother. So some of these routes that people may have taken may not be safe for someone who is elderly, right? Or someone who may have a medical condition or someone who is like disabled. So that's just something to keep in mind. So she said people are heading north. Go back here. Here we go.
So the evacuation routes that people have taken heading to Port Sudan or Dongola or Halfa in the north, headed towards the Egyptian border. For us, that arduous trip is not an option for health purposes and for safety purposes. Another thing is that we read the reports about the sheer numbers at the borders and the lack of facilities.
Yeah, so this is a big part of the problem. And that's the thing. Not everybody can afford to flee. Not everybody can take that risk. So for her, she said they might be better off just staying where they are.